Tom Horn's Arizona blood betrayal in the Apache Wars. Arizona, 1882. The sun bleaches the bones of cavalry horses as the U.S. Army corners 60 Apache warriors at Big Dry Wash. The last major battle of the Indian Wars. Amidst the chaos, a 22-year-old Missourian hauling ammo crates, not rifles, would later claim this bloody scene as his origin story. But military payroll records tell a different tale. Tom Horn was paid $35 a month as not a scout, no medals, no glory, just a guy who learned to turn survival into a tall tale. By 1885, he'd picked up Apache dialects, maybe even married into a clan, or so he bragged, and lost 2,000 cattle raids, yet somehow rose to command Apache scouts. Men who called him Talking Boy for his constant self-promotion. Was he the frontier's deadliest shot or its slickest storyteller? When Geronimo finally surrendered, Horn was there at the negotiations, his bullet-riddled hat, supposedly proof of the Crawford Affair's botched ambush, where a U.S. captain caught friendly fire. But scratch the surface. Army logs don't even list Horn as a translator that day. So here's the puzzle: how does a runaway farm kid, who once shot up brothels for kicks, become both the Army's go-to scout and the Apache's whispered devil in a big hat? Was Tom Horn a product of the West's wild side, or its most cunning con artist? The real story lies buried deeper than Shedrick's grave. The childhood dog, whose death first sent him running, hit play to unpack the bullet-riddled mystery that history can't quite nail down. Welcome to Native Legends and History, stories where America's forgotten frontier stories come to life. Subscribe to uncover the real deal. From the heart of the West, under the sprawling oaks of Scotland County, Missouri, a boy was born on November 21, 1860, who'd later bend the definition of outlaw. Thomas Horn Jr.'s father, a strict Methodist and hardware store owner, ruled over 600 acres of prime farmland in a bank. His mum, a devout member of the Church of Christ, filled their house with hymns and scripture. But young Tom wasn't interested in piety or plows. By 8 years old, he'd vanish for days into the woods, a stolen rifle slung over his shoulder, his only sidekick, a scruffy terrier named She, by his side. "I'd rather take a whooping than sit through another sermon," Tom later wrote, recalling how he'd come home with rabbit pelts and fresh welts from his father's belt. School records from Memphis Academy show 37 absences. In 1874 alone, his teachers marked him down as incorrigible. Then came the summer of '75, a turning point etched in gunpowder. A wagon train camped near the Horn farm and ever loyal snapped at a kid, teasing Tom. A gunshot rang out, the terrier crumpled, blood pooling in the dust. "I held him till he went cold," Horn confessed, decades later. "That's when I learned death don't play fair." Rebellion hardened into something sharper. At 16, after a fistfight with his father over stolen whiskey, Tom hawked his .45-70 Springfield 411, about $300 today, and bolted west. Census records place him in Newton, Kansas by 1876, laying railroad ties for $1.25 a day, but the prairie couldn't hold him. When his father staked a claim near Grinnell in 1877, Tom briefly returned, spinning yarns about fighting 20 Cheyenne braves to protect their cattle problem. Army reports from Fort Wallace show 0 raids in Gove County that year. By 1878, he drifted to his brother's livery stable in Burton, Kansas, mucking stalls and breaking horses. A local newspaper ad from May 1878, Horn Wrangler, 15-month, but the quiet life bored him stiff, as one cowboy later remembered. That kid start fights just to taste his own blood. The West was brewing up its perfect storm: a fatherless boy, a fistful of lies, and a Colt six-shooter itching for a reputation. By 1878, Texas was a sprawling landscape of sun-baked plains and wide-open opportunity. Tom Horn, now 18, signed on with the Snyder Brothers Ranch near San Angelo, $30 a month plus grub. His skill with a lasso became the stuff of legend. At the 1879 Dodge City Rodeo, he roped a steer in 8.2 seconds, pocketing a $1,000 prize, nearly $30,000 in today's money. That Missouri kid could rope the devil's tail and tie it in a bow, drawled veteran drover Jim McAllister in a Fort Worth Gazette interview. Buffalo Bill Cody supposedly offered Horn a gig in his Wild West show, but Tom scoffed, ain't no show pony, yet shadows dogged his rising fame. In March 1879, a San Antonio brothel owner filed a police report about a drunk cowpuncher who'd tied his furniture to saddles and dragged it down Alamo Plaza. Witnesses eyed Horn, but charges vanished. When the rancher coughed up $150 in damages, then came the whispers, that same summer. Historians still argue about it. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, author of Borderland points Ballads, out 1879, court docket shows 0 homicides in Bexar County that summer, but 14 unidentified Mexican deaths went unrecorded. Was Horn a killer, or just a convenient scapegoat for Texas's lawless frontier? The curtain fell suddenly on Christmas Eve, 1879. A feverish Tom stumbled into a Wichita clinic, his throat swollen shut. Dr. Elias Pratt, surgical log reads, tonsillectomy performed, sans anesthetic patient spat blood, laughed, said, hurts less than Paws belt. By dawn, he'd vanished, leaving behind a blood-stained bandana and a mother who'd never hear his voice again. The West's most dangerous ghost was born. As winter's chill loosened its grip on Colorado's mining towns, in March 1880, a lanky, 20-year-old Horn shuffled through Leadville's muddy streets. The silver boom had lured thousands to this mountain outpost where 2 railroad titans, the Denver and Rio Grande, and the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, were locked in a fierce battle for control of vital mountain passes. Heard they're hiring guns for the railroad war, a grizzled miner told Horn in a saloon. Good cash if you can handle a rifle. While local papers buzzed with stories of hired guns like Bat Masterson and Doc Holliday joining the fray. Official records don't show Horn's involvement. This would become a recurring theme in Horn's life, the chasm between documented fact and colorful frontier legend. By late 1880, Horn had drifted south to Arizona Territory. The stark landscape that greeted him was a tinderbox of tension. The once powerful Apache nations, who had called these lands home for over 13,000 years, were being systematically forced onto reservations. Fort Apache and San Carlos held thousands captive behind their wooden walls, while small bands of warriors still fought desperately for their freedom. The Apache are like the wind. An old scout told Horn, they appear out of nowhere, strike like lightning, and vanish into the mountains. At Camp Verde, Horn found work as a night herder, watching over horses under the vast, starry skies, but his ambitions pulled him toward Fort Whipple in 1881, where he signed on as a civilian teamster for the Army. Military records paint a straightforward picture. Contrary to later myths, Horn wasn't yet the legendary scout he'd become. Instead, he drove supply wagons and packed mules, unglamorous but essential work in the harsh Arizona Territory. The real story lies in how this Missouri transformed himself through these experiences. While hauling supplies alongside Apache scouts, Horn absorbed their language, tracking skills, and way of thinking. He learned the art of survival in a land where a misread trail or a missed warning sign meant certain death. Watch how they read the land, advised Al Seba, the renowned chief of scouts, who would become Horn's mentor. Every broken twig, every overturned stone tells a story. What makes Horn's case so compelling is how his early years highlight a broader, historical trend: the complex role of civilian contractors. In the American West, these men, teamsters, packers, and scouts operated in a gray area between military and civilian life, often wielding considerable influence. Despite their unofficial status, the question that would come to define Horn's legacy was already taking shape. How did a simple teamster become one of the most feared men in the West? The answer lies not in the exaggerated tales he would later spin, but in these formative years when he learned the brutal realities of warfare at the feet of masters like Al Seba. This period raises fascinating questions about the nature of truth in Western history. How much of what we know about figures like Horn is fact, and how much is carefully crafted frontier mythology? The story of the young teamster, who would become a legendary scout, challenges us to look beyond simplistic narratives of heroes and villains, to find a more complex and ultimately more compelling truth. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly in the summer of 1881, as Tom Horn helped clear the wreckage after the Battle of Sebiqui Creek. Blood-stained rocks and spent shell casings littered the ground, where just days before, 7 troopers had fallen. That's when he first met Al Sieber, the legendary chief of scouts whose mere presence commanded respect. Sieber's weathered face spoke of countless battles, from the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg to the sun-scorched canyons of Apache country. A deep scar on his left leg marked where a Confederate bullet had found its mark. His calloused hands gripped a Winchester rifle as naturally as most men held a coffee cup. "You want to survive out here, boy?" Sieber growled at the young teamster, his German accent still noticeable after decades in America. "Then watch, listen, and keep your damn mouth shut." The reality of their early relationship was far from the romanticized versions Horn would later tell military records. Don't show Sieber recruiting him as a scout. In 1876, Horn wasn't even in Arizona then. Instead, the young teamster earned his place the hard way, hauling supplies through dangerous territory while absorbing every detail of frontier skills. In the months that followed, Horn's education came through sweat and dust. He learned to decipher the desert's subtle language, a displaced pebble, a bent blade of grass. The sudden silence of birds, Spanish and Apache, words began to flow from his tongue as he worked alongside native scouts. Each supply run through Apache territory was a masterclass in survival. Horn watched everything, and Apache Scout recalled years later, his eyes never stopped moving. Like a coyote in new territory, he learned our ways, not by asking, but by seeing. Sieber's lessons were brutally practical. One morning, as dawn painted the desert gold, he pointed to tracks crossing bare rock. "See how the dust settled in the heel print? That's a war party moved through here before the night." Wind died 8, maybe 9 man-hours later. They found the remains of a raided ranch, exactly where the tracks had led. The shift from teamster to scout was gradual, but the harsh realities of frontier life left their mark when Sieber killed. It was swift and matter-of-fact. A Mexican trader once remarked that death in Sieber's hands was purely practical, while Horn seemed to study it like a craftsman. This observation would prove insightful in the years to come. During one supply run, Horn witnessed Sieber deal with an unruly Apache scout. The chief's knife flashed in the sunlight. The body hit the ground before anyone could react. "Out here," Sieber said, "cleaning his blade, hesitation gets you killed." The lesson wasn't lost on his young apprentice. By the time autumn painted the canyon walls crimson, Horn had absorbed more than just tracking skills. He'd internalized Sieber's ruthless efficiency, his cold calculations, his understanding that survival in Apache country meant becoming as dangerous as the land itself. The young teamster who'd arrived in Arizona with dreams of adventure was fading, replaced by something harder, more lethal. Military dispatches from this period paint a picture of increasing competence. Horn progressed from hauling supplies to accompanying scout parties, though not yet in an official capacity. His name started appearing in reports, noted for his language skills and ability to read signs. The Apache themselves gave him a name that roughly translated to "he who watches," though they would later amend this to "he who talks about himself." As his reputation grew, the partnership between Sieber and Horn marked a crucial transition in frontier warfare. Civil War veterans like Sieber were passing their hard-won knowledge to a new generation, but they were teaching more than just military tactics. They were shaping a particular breed of frontiersmen, men who could navigate between worlds, who understood both military precision and Apache cunning, and who would shape the violent destiny of the American West. As winter approached and cavalry patrols intensified their hunt for renegade Apache bands, Horn's apprenticeship under Sieber was nearing its end. The lessons learned in those blood-soaked months would soon be put to the test, as the former teamster began his transformation into one of the most feared men in the Southwest. The desert had claimed another soul, and the real killing was about to begin. The sun rose above the Mogollon Rim on July 17, 1882. As Tom Horn shouldered his pack saddle, the air cracked with tension. Nacogdoches warriors had ambushed and killed several policemen at San Carlos, then fled northwest now. After days of pursuit, the army had finally cornered them. Bullets kicked up dust around Horn as he moved between the supply lines, The sharp crack of rifles echoed off the canyon walls, mingling with war cries and shouted commands. This wasn't his fight, not really. He was just a civilian packer, hauling ammunition to the soldiers and Apache scouts spread across the rocky ridges. Keep those supplies moving. A lieutenant's voice cut through the gunfire. The scouts are running low up north. By nightfall, the shooting had stopped. As the smell of gunpowder faded into the desert air, no one knew, they just fought. What would be the last major battle with the Apache on American soil? That October, Horn traded his pack, saddles for a rancher's responsibilities. The job seemed simple enough: manage a herd and deliver beef to the Apache. At San Carlos, regular work, decent pay, a chance to prove himself as more than just a supply hand. But the desert had other plans. Spring arrived, bringing another campaign into Mexico's Sierra Madre Mountains. Horn went along, still hauling supplies through Apache territory. At night, around the campfire, Alceba would point toward the dark peaks rising against the stars. "You see those mountains," the old scout said, tobacco smoke curling around his words. "The Apache know every shadow up there, every cave, every spring, every escape route. We're just visitors here." Then came the day that would forever stain Horn's reputation. He was driving 2,000 cattle towards San Carlos when a rider brought news of Apache warriors nearby. The decision he made in that moment stripped away all the frontier bravado, revealing the calculating survivor underneath. 2,000 head ain't worth a single man's life, he told his cowboys, before scattering the entire herd across the landscape. The cattle vanished into the brush while Horn led his men to safety. The ranch owners found him later, in Tucson. "You lost us a fortune." They cornered him at the Oriental Saloon. Faces red with fury, 2,000 head just turned loose. Horn met their anger with cold logic. "Better to lose cattle than coffin up good men," he said, taking a slow sip of whiskey. "You want to risk your neck for beef? You're welcome to round them up yourself." It was the right choice, the practical choice. But that didn't stop the whispers. That followed him through every saloon and cow camp in the territory. The man who would later gain notoriety as one of the deadliest killers in the West had run rather than fight. But something changed in Horn after that. The shame of retreat burned in him, like the desert sun on bare skin. When he returned to the Sierra Madre that spring, the practical packer was fading, replaced by something harder. The man who had once scattered cattle to avoid a fight would soon become someone that others went out of their way to avoid. The transformation had begun. Tom Horn was learning that on the frontier, a man's reputation was worth more than 2,000 head of cattle, and he would spend the next years of his life building a new one written not in lost cattle, but in blood. Life at San Carlos Reservation painted a different picture of Tom Horn than the one history would remember. In the early morning hours, he could be seen teaching Apache farmers how to handle plows, his commands mixing English with their native tongue. Evenings found him in an Apache wickiup, where a woman, whose name is lost to time, would cook over an open fire while children played at his feet. The Apache called him Talking Boy in those days, and their oral histories, the man who walked between two worlds. By day, he worked as a clerk in the reservation store, keeping ledgers and settling disputes. At night, he lived, as many frontiermen did, with an Apache woman who bore him children, though he never officially acknowledged them as his own. His attempt at building a life crumbled. In the spring of 1885, under the cover of darkness, Mexican raiders and hostile Apache struck his growing herd by morning. His cattle and horses, nearly 100 head, had vanished into the vast borderland. The loss stripped him of everything he'd built, but it also freed him to become something else entirely. The winter of 1885 marked Horn's official transformation. Captain Crawford needed a new chief of scouts, someone who could command the Apache trackers in their own language. Horn, with his years of experience and linguistic skills, was the obvious choice. The former teamster now led 20 Apache scouts, men who had once been warriors themselves. "Your lives are in each other's hands," he told his scouts in their own tongue, his accent perfect after years of practice. "We move as one, or we don't move at all." On December 11, 1885, Horn led his scouts across the Mexican border. The cold desert air bit through their clothes as they tracked Geronimo's band through the Sierra Madre Mountains. Every morning, Horn would scan the horizon with his binoculars, looking for smoke from cooking fires. Every evening, his scouts would report back with fresh signs: a discarded food wrapper, scattered ashes, a fresh horseprint in the sandy soil. The pursuit became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Geronimo's band moved like ghosts through the landscape, but Horn's scouts were their equals. In woodcraft, they followed tracks so faint that even veteran soldiers couldn't see them. Through canyons and mesas, they went, closing the gap day by day. Then, on January 10, 1886, one of Horn's scouts spotted a thin wisp of smoke rising against the dawn sky. Through his binoculars, Horn counted the figures moving around the camp. Geronimo's band finally within reach. After a month of pursuit, how many? Captain Crawford whispered. 17 warriors, Horn replied, lowering his glasses, plus women and children. They're cooking breakfast, not expecting us. The discovery should have been Horn's moment of triumph. Instead, it would lead to one of the bloodiest mistakes in the Apache Wars. Within hours, the quiet mountain morning would erupt in gunfire, not between the army and the Apache, but in a tragic confrontation that would leave Captain Crawford dead, and Horn nursing a bullet wound. The Apache woman and her children waited at San Carlos, but they would wait in vain. Tom Horn would survive the coming battle, but the man who returned would be forever changed. The reservation clerk, who had lived peacefully among the Apache, was gone. In his place stood a harder man, one whose name would soon be whispered in fear. Across the territories, the mountains of Mexico loomed silent. In the pre-dawn hours of January 11, 1886, Tom Horn sat cleaning his Winchester rifle when the first Apache scout's warning pierced the cold air. 20 feet away, another scout grabbed his arm, pointing toward movement in the scrub oak. The metallic snap of rifle hammers being cocked echoed across the canyon. Horn's fingers tightened on his rifle. As Mexican militia emerged from the shadows, he counted at least 30 men, led by Lieutenant Santa Anna Perez and the renowned scout, Don Mauricio Corredor, the same Corredor who had killed the great Apache chief, Victoria, years before. "Hold your fire, Horn," bellowed an Apache to his scouts, then switched to Spanish, his voice carrying across the ravine. "Soldados, American soldiers." Bullets answered his call. The Mexican troops kept advancing, their rifles crackling in the dim light. Horn's left arm exploded in pain as a bullet tore through muscle. He stumbled, but kept his feet, blood soaking his sleeve. Captain Crawford grabbed his shoulder. "We need to make them understand." Together, they scrambled onto a massive boulder, both men silhouetted against the lightning sky. Crawford's uniform buttons gleamed in the first rays of sun. He raised both arms, shouting, "America!" A single shot cracked across the canyon. Crawford's head snapped back, a crimson stream painting the rock behind him. The battle raged for 2 hours. 4 Mexican soldiers fell dead, including. When Perez's men finally raised a white flag, they tried to arrest Lieutenant Moss, Crawford's second-in-command. Horn's Apache scouts responded with war cries that echoed off the canyon walls. The Mexican troops, already shaken from losing 4 of their own, quickly released Mouse. Crawford clung to life for 7 days, never regaining consciousness.